Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 224. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the evening of Wednesday, June the 9th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. We're going to talk about baseball on this podcast. And I said we because my guest today is JJ Marx. He's been on the show before, and welcome back to the show again, JJ.
Thanks for having me on, James. Just cracked open a cold, frosty one for today's conversation.
I heard it. Very good. Very good. If you're going to talk about baseball, you got to pop a beer. And what do you have?
Going with the king today, James.
Budweiser. Very, very good. Very good. If you're going to talk about baseball, I can't think of something better to drink than the king. And this is for those of you who are not in the area, in the greater St. Louis area, it's a muggy night. It was a overcast day, sunny evening, hot, muggy, typical end of spring, early summer St. Louis weather. And I wanted to talk about baseball, and I wanted to bring you into this. Two reasons. First of all, this is not for those of you who are not big sports fans and you're thinking, oh my gosh, here we go. We're going to talk about sports. Well, we are and we aren't. We're not going to talk about a ton of the baseball per se, but we're going to talk about baseball, the history, where it used to be, where it is today, where it's going tomorrow. And in my opinion, as goes baseball, quite often, as goes the rest of the country in many ways. I personally believe that baseball is still the national pastime. Sure, okay, football is more popular. Basketball and hockey playoffs are arguably very exciting. But in baseball, many think is too boring, too slow, etc. But I didn't say the national. I'm sorry.
Too long, too.
And too long, yeah, and all that's true. But I didn't say it's America's favorite sport. I said it's America's favorite pastime. Because with baseball, you may have a 3.5-hour game, but you don't have to pay attention to the whole thing. You can talk in between innings. You can go to the bathroom between innings. You can grab a beer between pitches even. It's a pastime. It's leisure activity. It's a good thing to sit and watch. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I always grew up playing the game, and I like to watch it. And I played other sports too, but baseball seems like one that I'm not the tallest person. I'm not the most athletic person, and it seemed like a sport that I could fit into pretty well. And so I always had a lot of respect for baseball players and, how, their ability to, hit a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. You don't have to be a freak athlete to do that. You do have to have a lot of God-given talent, though, and so it's always a fun sport to play, and it's a great sport to watch too.
Well, and you mentioned the physical build. I mean, if you're 5'10", you're not going to be a good basketball player unless you're extremely talented. Okay, because if you're going against a guy who's 6'10", you're going to lose every time. If you play football and you're 5'5", $150, you're not going to be very good at football. If you're a hockey player and can't ice skate very well, you're never going to be a good ice skater. You don't have to be a great athlete to be a great ball player, or even a good athlete to be a good ball player. There's arguably the greatest baseball player of all time, Babe Ruth, was not exactly a picture of health. Okay. And it just, who was the guy who played for the Phillies? He was a first baseman for the Phillies. Played back in the, I don't know, maybe the 20s, the 2000s. John Kruk.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Remember him?
Big fat guy with a mullet, yeah.
Yeah, and he was a great hitter, pretty good defender, but a great hitter. And they asked him about being an athlete, and he would stop them. So no, I'm not an athlete. I'm a baseball player. And he played till he was about 31, 32, and then he couldn't do it anymore, and he retired. But he was a very good baseball player. Maybe not great, but definitely very good.
Yeah, I think of Jose Altuve, too, the guy who Plays for the Houston Astros. What's he like, 5'5", 5'2", maybe?
Yeah, very, very
Not,
short, very tiny.
but I mean, he's won an MVP, I think. So
Yeah,
he's a pretty
yeah,
good player.
exactly. Bartolo Colon, who was,
Big,
uh,
sexy.
yeah, big, sexy. Yeah, I mean, at the end of his career, and he pitched until he was 45 or 46 years old. And he just recently retired just a year or two ago. And he was 45 years old, 6'2", and about 300 pounds. I mean, the guy was a tub of goo, but he was still a good pitcher.
Did you ever see the video of him hitting a home run?
No.
It was when he played for the Mets, I think. Toward the end of his career, he got his first and only major league home run, and it is a sight to behold. I'll tell you what, James. It is the ripple effect that happens when he makes contact. It's something else.
And I guess the ripple effect when he was running around the bases too, maybe.
Yeah, I probably almost didn't make it.
But baseball has changed. I mean, throughout the years. I mean, my father, who played a little bit of baseball, gave me his baseball glove when I was a boy, and it was one of those flat gloves that looked like a big mitten with two strips of leather between the pointer finger and the thumb. That was it. That was the glove. There was no true pocket. Okay. Gloves have changed. Equipment has changed. But that's just going to always change. Baseball batters now, I mean, when they get up to plate, they have like a suit of mail on almost. They got so much armor that if they get hit, they're probably not going to get hurt. That's something that's new. And the way statistics are kept, the whole sabermetrics thing. And sabermetrics came into vogue when? About?
I would say like 2003 or so was when the Oakland Athletics started getting really good under Billy Beane. I want to say that was like 2002, 2003.
Okay.
So I suppose that's when they first got their the recognition about them.
Yeah, and I think sabermetrics has just changed the game dramatically. The statistical part of the game. Would you agree?
Definitely. It's changed the way batters approach the plate. It changes the way pitchers throw to batters and the way defenses play particular hitters. And in many ways, in my opinion, it's made it a little less entertaining of a game because it's a numbers game at this point. And I don't want to watch guys play a bunch of math problems. I want to see them play baseball.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same way. It's kind of turned baseball into a real life video game in many respects. But for those of you who don't know what sabermetrics are, give a little bit of background with Billy Beane and the father of sabermetrics, who he was, what he did, and why he had success with it. And basically, other teams copied his success.
Sure. I couldn't even tell you what SABR stands for. I can't remember that, but it actually started a long time ago, long before Billy Beane. But they were just basically a bunch of guys that were just kind of nerds, and they would nerd out about baseball, and they would basically put together more or less a fantasy league in which they would kind of keep people's stats in a very particular way.
I guess via computer, because they could do that around that time.
I guess it might have been in like the 70s or the 80s when not a lot of people had computers. They might
Okay.
have done it with pencil and paper, but basically it was a way of keeping interesting stats that they weren't really talking about in the game at the time. So they wouldn't keep, super high value in things like batting average or RBIs or errors or uh, stats, number of home runs, or things that we would normally look at the back of a baseball card and read. They would keep more track of like how often and how frequently a player gets on base, or a pitcher's I'm not really even sure what sabermetrics they keep for pitchers, to be honest. A lot of them are hitting, and
Well, a
and
lot
so
of
they put a lot more value on your ability to get on base.
mm-hmm,
Getting on base is the most important thing, and so a walk is as good as a single as far as anyone is concerned.
mm-hmm.
And so, it it changes the way people play the game then. And so Billy Beane, who is, I guess they call him the president of baseball operations, but at the time he was the general manager of the Oakland Athletics. They were a team that didn't spend a lot of money. If you ever watched the movie Moneyball, it's a very good movie. It's about Billy Beane and how he, as the general manager of the Oakland Athletics, was the guy who kind of turned the league on its head. And instead of there being teams like the New York Yankees or the Los Angeles Dodgers that would just spend gobs and gobs of money for the guys who are obviously the best players, not every team can do that. And so Oakland being a smaller team and a smaller market, I mean, I guess the Bay Area is kind of a big market, but the Giants are always the more popular team in the area anyway. And so they never got the pick of the litter. And so they kind of had to get more creative with how they were picking players. And they call that Moneyball because you would save a lot of money in getting players for bang for your buck type of thing. And that kind of caught on with a lot of other teams. And so teams like the Houston Astros or the Tampa Bay Tampa Bay Rays now, they sort of took advantage of that type of play as well in order to make themselves more competitive.
So they would take a guy who maybe had a low batting average, and because his batting average was low, his value was low, and they could get him for a whole lot less money. However, he walked a lot. So his batting average may have been 220, but his on-base percentage may have been 380 because he walked a lot. And because they could get someone like that cheap, they got somebody on the cheap who was on base a lot.
Exactly. And then, you could just kind of hope that somebody could hit him into second or third base and you score runs that way,
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, just somebody else isn't paying attention to the number of walks this guy's getting. And so you can just get him for cheaper. That's all.
Well, then with a very limited payroll, the Oakland A's actually did quite well. They didn't make the playoffs every year, but they made the playoffs occasionally, whereas before they were always in the cellar. And while they never won a championship, their winning percentage, when you compare it to how much money they actually spent on players, was very good.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the game at the time was you just make it into the playoffs, because once the playoffs are on, I mean, if anybody's watched playoff baseball, they know, all bets are off. It's you just have a team that has a winning record at that point that wins the World Series, where you got such a large sample size of an entire season, 162 games. You like your odds of succeeding throughout the season. And so, yeah, the Oakland Athletics could have teams. Gosh, I want to say they were a 100-win team that season in the Moneyball season.
Mm-hmm.
They actually weren't I want to say the Seattle Mariners had a better record than them somehow, but they still had 100 wins in the season, and they made it to the playoffs, and they might have made it out of the first round. They obviously didn't win the World Series, but they just didn't get hot at the right time, basically, is how that worked.
And the thing about getting into the playoffs is a lot to be said for that. The last time the Cardinals won the World Series, I think they won, 84, 85, 86 games is all they won. They were barely over 500 and made it in with the wild card.
Yeah, sometimes you just get a good matchup in the playoffs and some guy gets hot, and you can't keep track of that during the season. But sometimes you catch fire at the end, and that's all it takes. That was like the 2016 that had barely a winning record, and they ended up winning the World Series.
And if you think about it, if you make it to the playoffs, there's 4 rounds of playoffs, I guess, right? I think it's 4 rounds. So in all you have to do is play 4 games over 500 for close to a month, and you win. That's all you have to do.
Yeah, right. And only one team can do it. But
right.
If you think about it, you don't have to play out of your minds, but you kind of do. So.
Well, because the competition is good. I mean, a lot of times teams, they feast on the horrible teams, and they just don't do anything against the good teams. Those